Okay, great. Once again, good evening, everyone. So today is 8th of March. I wanted to wish each one of you a very happy Women's Day from Product People team. Thank you for all the amazing things you do to make this world a better place. And yeah, moving on to our session for today. So today's session is on landing a product strategy, and we have Roy with us, who is the product manager at Meta, formerly known as Facebook, and he's going to walk us through the session. Before I invite our speaker for today, I quickly wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Malvika, and I work as an associate product manager with Product People. Before joining Product People, I was working as a product operations manager with a digital healthcare company. And I have been working for almost 2 months at Product People. And I'm working with clients like OneFootball, RotaGeek, and more. So what we do at Product People. So our mission is to help companies discover and deliver great products. We are already a community of 10,000 plus members, and we believe in sharing knowledge generously. We take on all the hands-on, unglamorous work of a PM, and we work on an interim basis. Sometimes we are also known as freelance product managers. What we specialize in is onboard fast, align teams, and deliver outcomes quickly. So before we start the session, we also wanted to get to know your understanding on the session. So on the screen, you will see 3 questions, and you'll also see a survey on your screen, which you can put your answers there. So let me know if you're able to see that. So the first question is about, have you ever conceived a product strategy? Yes or no? Second, what do you think is the most important factor for establishing a good product strategy? A, knowing your leadership expectations, B, being thorough to look around corners, C, details around what to build, and D, having buy-in from stakeholders. In case if nothing matches your previous experience, feel free to put it in the comment section under the third other section. And the third question is, how do you use the product strategy once it's made? A, as a reference doc used to frame initiatives. B, define where and how much to invest. And C, define the roadmap. And D, again, feel free to share it in the comments. So I'll give you guys a minute to fill in your answers. In case if you're not able to see the poll, you can also put it in the comment section and we'll add it over here. I'm interested to know what people reply for the second question, because I think having buy-in from stakeholders is extremely important, but yeah, also having expectations from your leadership. So I'm excited to know what everyone thinks about this. Okay, so we'll give it another minute. Okay, I think we might be ready.
Yeah, just gonna give it a few more moments, Malvika, because some people came in late to give them the chance to answer. But yeah, like a majority has already answered, so we're gonna get the consensus soon.
Great. So I see someone from YouTube, David, had answered 1. We have for first, we have no, A, both A and C. Okay. We have a second, we have A. Okay, so we have A, C, D as answers. Great. So, okay, time to share the results. So most of you have answered for the first question. 73% of the people have said yes, that they have conceived a product strategy at their organization. For second question, most of the people have answered first one, knowing your leadership expectations. Absolutely. Some of 50% of the people have also answered having buy-in from stakeholders, and 36% have answered details around what to build. Fully agree. For the third question, most of the people have answered define the roadmap, and also 36 people have answered as a reference doc used to frame initiatives. Great. Thank you guys for answering the questions. So without further ado, I would like to invite Roy to introduce. And Roy, the stage is yours. I'll stop sharing my screen so that you're able to share your screen. And we are super excited to know what you have to share today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roy, and I'm a PM working at Meta right now. I work with the ad side of the business, and I've worked with Meta in London for about 2.5 years now. Prior to this, I used to work with Booking.com in Amsterdam for a couple of years. And then I spent about 6 years working in Amazon in India, leading a bunch of work on the seller experience in the marketplace side. I started my life as doing physical retail with Walmart in India. And I was also a strategy consultant at some time. So kind of been a product manager for over the last decade or so, and super interested to talk about strategy because that's something I believe in. And secondly, there does not seem to be a playbook for it. Even in the same organization, when I worked across different product groups, everybody approaches it differently. Every strategy exercise you do is very unique. And hence, to me, it's a good opportunity to talk about what my learnings of strategy has been. The entire concept of a presentation is I'm going to talk about what is strategy, how I look at it, and then talk about some tips and tricks of how to actually land a strategy. So essentially, what is a strategy? A strategy talks about what we need to do, but it's not just talking about it, which is important. What I think is important is to land it. Now, what does landing a strategy mean? It can mean different things to different people. In some organizations, in some situations, it means you get funding for a new initiative you want to do. In some organizations or some initiatives, it might mean you stop doing what you're doing and focus on something new. Somewhere else, it's also about figuring out where to invest how much. So there's no one common definition of landing the strategy, but there definitely is something called success. At the end of the strategy process, you might see that it's a success. The other thing which is very important to talk about is this presentation will not talk about what makes a final successful strategy over the long run, because there are a bunch of things which are going there. What I just want to focus on is how to build a strategy, right? And how to continue maintaining it and running it for some period of time. So let me start by talking about what is a strategy. Really, strategy is one part of the puzzle. If I say my product strategy is to be the low-cost solution, it does not mean anything without the context surrounding it. What's the context of the industry? What's happening? Or if I suddenly one day go up and say, oh, I want to build premium clothing for a garment retailer. Again, without the entire context, without what you're trying to do, these strategy statements do not make a lot of sense. Hence, when you think about strategy, don't just think about the kernel or the direction today. Think about it from the entire framing, which is around context and the current state. How do you measure success? Then comes the kernel of the strategy, and then it translates to measuring progress and the roadmaps. So the key takeaway I wanted you to take away from this is think of strategy always in context. It's not just one or two statements that make a strategy. Now, I want to start to talk about what is context. Context for a strategy means what is the current state of the world. But it's not just the current state of the world which is important. You also need to think about what will the world look like in the future if you do nothing, right? I'll give a specific example of this. Let's say that in the current state of the world, right, people don't use technologies like VR a lot. There's a limited adoption, right? But if you're building a strategy for 10 years, VR will be a big thing. So if you don't acknowledge that as part of your context, you're missing a beat. So as you think about strategy, think about the context today. Think about how the market is evolving over the next 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, whatever your strategic horizon is. That's one. The second point I want to ensure is that you write a strategy so you can tell others what you want to do. Now, if you're thinking of a senior leadership, you might know 50 things around your industry, around your context that is important, but your leaders haven't gone as deep as that. So you need to establish context with them in 2 minutes, in 5 minutes. So that is also very important when you talk about context, is how do you frame the overall context of what's happening in a very crisp, short timeline so that leaders can understand what's happening. It is sometimes not about being comprehensive, but a lot of times it's about finding the most important things to talk about and making sure they understand the most things. I have some current state examples from different companies. There's one from Uber, there's one from LinkedIn. And if you see, the cab industry has a bunch more problems than is written here. But it's, again, as I said, importance to prioritize and to make sure you can convey as much context in as short a time as possible. Now, once you know the context in a strategy, you need to define where you want to go. Now, how do you define where you want to go? The simple answer is you define an end state. But defining an end state is also hard, right? Here you can see some of the statements which are written there, and the ones you see in blue are not good statements. Why are they not good statements? Because some of them seem very common sense and seem very things like companies and organizations do. The reason they're not good statements is they don't focus on outcomes, right? They focus on a particular metric. For example, increase market share by 10%. Plus, is it your end state? What if your market share goes up by 9%? What does that mean? Or what if your market share needs to go up by 20%? So setting metrics as long-term end statements is not a good idea. Secondly, again, increasing market share does not take into account what if your market suddenly explodes, or what if your market suddenly contracts and becomes smaller and other players leave because it's a bad market. So hence, these are not good statements, success statements in my mind. You should think about what are the outcomes you want to do. The other thing is, you don't want to make your success statement about projects you want to watch. Why? Because ultimately, as product people, we are building a product towards an outcome. And you don't want to get married towards a particular project to move the outcome, right? Let's say that we talk about example here, launch a backend system to translate. What if you suddenly realize that it's better to translate using humans? Does that mean your end state changes? Actually, no, right? Because the end outcome you want is the service to be available across multiple languages. And that's a much better way of framing your success statement than to talk about what exact thing you want to do. So again, as you're thinking about defining the product end state, right? Think of the success statement you want to do. Make sure it focuses on outcomes. Don't make it very metric-centric or measurement-centric or project-centric. And a lot of us are familiar with the Amazon press release. Amazon press release is a technique Amazon is used in Amazon where you envisage what the end state looks like and write it before. This is an example of a success statement because you're sitting today and you're writing of what the future looks like. Again, good press releases won't really talk about what is the exact solution you are building, what is the metric you're moving. You're more focused on what is the end experience you're doing. So this is one way of you can write a success statements. There are a bunch of different ways you can try that. Once you know what your context is, where you want to go for success, the next part is how to get there, right? And strategic paths are essentially like an RPG. You can choose where to go. Now, a good strategy means that you will have, if you really thought through, you will have multiple alternatives in front of you. And then it's a call as product leaders to help pick the right alternative. And we have some examples here. One of the first examples you can see is Tinder versus Bumble. So both are dating apps, but both, if you see, have taken very different strategic paths. Bumble has taken a path where it's women-driven and women get to do the first response. Versus Tinder, it's an equal match. Very, very different options. The second example you see is the Amazon shopping checkout page. And if you see here, the interesting thing is you're having Amazon as well as a bunch of different other sellers compete to sell the same item to the customer. Now, there obviously is another strategic path which Amazon could have taken and took earlier, where the sellers and Amazon don't compete on the same product. And these discoveries are discrete. Think of an eBay kind of example. That's also very similar, where not a lot of sellers compete on the same thing. Again, there were distinct paths, and based on the understanding, based on the overall direction, Amazon took a particular path and eBay took a particular path. So when you're thinking about strategy, think about what are all the paths in front of you, and then you need to choose a path. Now you've chosen a path, right? How do you make sure it's working? Because, and that's also a very important part of the strategy, is putting in these guardrails or feedback loops to make sure they're working in the proper way. Let's take an example, right? We have the satellite phone. This was one of the big innovations about 20, 30 years back, where you could connect to a satellite and talk, right? And it made sense because a lot of the world was not connected, right? But as the companies were building it, they did not take into account the fact that mobile networks were becoming more and more prevalent. So at a certain period of time, right, they kind of missed the boat and they realized the context had completely shifted. And hence the strategy did not work. The other classic examples you have that is Kodak, right? If you look at the graph, one talks about decline of film sold, right? And I think people in Kodak at that time were trying to solve that, okay, how do we stop the decline in film sold? I think what they forgot is that there was another thing which is happening at the same time, which is the camera market was growing and digital sales of cameras coming up. So ultimately, if we look at what happened, what's common in all of these cases, right? One is that there were certain assumptions around the context which was made. And as these companies were executing, I don't know whether they really looked at the context and whether the context and the fundamental assumptions were changing. Second is, what was the companies trying to solve for? And hence, what was the metrics they were using? For example, if Kodak was using something like number of photographs taken, right? They'd have easily realized that that number would have been going up, right? Versus if they tried to optimize a number of films rolls sold, that number was going to go down. So again, it's what is the output metric in this end success state you're trying to do? Is the end success state that Kodak needs to be the number one medium for photography? Or is it that Kodak needs to sell the most number of film rolls? So having that end state and output very clearly defined and the metrics very clearly defined is a way you make sure strategy is a success. Now, it also comes, now once you have the building blocks of strategy, as we talked about earlier, context, the direction you can take, right? How do you measure? There's also another question, right? Where does strategy end and where does plans begin? And that's something even I am grappling with right now. So let's say that you're making a 5-year strategy, right? You start phase 0, which is context, understanding the expectations, setting the context, setting the definition. Then what happens? You can definitely go to define a set of high-level initiatives to get to the end state, but those initiatives might not be deep enough. For example, let's say you're working in an e-commerce setup and you're working in supply chain. And you say, one of my key initiatives is to make sure I can deliver things in 24 hours. Now, that's an open question. Is that good enough for a strategy document, or is that not actionable enough? Because you're just saying, I want it to run in 24 hours. You're not outlining what are the investments you need to do it. How do you validate it's a real problem? What exactly do you need to build? And this is where the trade-off comes in, which is where does the broad product strategy end and the planning begin? And it depends upon situation to situation, company to company, leadership team expectation to leadership team expectation. And hence I've called it out as a gray area, because if you're working to build a strategy, make sure you have alignment with the people of what does a strategy entail. Is it that you want very, very well spec'd out definitions at the end of the strategy? Or is it just you want the outline taxonomy of the solutions? And then other people or in subsequent work, you can work on defining these things out more. Again, there's no clear answer here, but I'm just teeing it up as something to think about as you develop strategy. Because your strategy will land or not land depending upon where you set the expectation. If your leaders expect that you need to have a well spec'd out, validated thing, and you stop at phase 3, it's a failure. The other is also true also, right? If your leadership expects you to land at phase 3, you spend a lot of time going to phase 4, they'll say, you spent a lot of time working on it, whereas the strategy could have been ready much earlier. And that also will be seen negatively. So again, understanding this and the expectation is key thing to landing the strategy correctly. And once you do that, then the other question is, how do you make sure strategy and roadmap are in sync? Now, these are some myths which I see, right? Ultimately, a roadmap is a public document, right? It's supposed to help your team, but it's also supposed to help the organization understand what the product is doing, how it's evolving, right? So if it does not tie back clearly to the strategy, the framing is off, something is wrong, right? It's also that if a roadmap has a lot of things, maybe it means you don't really have a strategy because you're trying to throw everything to the wall and see what sticks. So make sure it's a very focused effort and a very intentional effort so that your roadmap and strategy are in sync. And I think the other interesting myth is that, okay, we have a plan in the roadmap, let's stick to it. Again, good companies, great companies say that they're very rigid on the final vision, but flexible on tactics. So as you're translating the roadmap into execution, make sure that you understand whether the fundamental assumptions have changed, whether your product is working or not, and be flexible in changing. Now, I want to sum this up by saying, okay, we've talked about what are the things you need to do, build a strategy, how do you make it real, how do you make sure it's land. I think the most important thing in landing the strategy is to make sure you're following a good communication cycle, right? You understand your stakeholders, you send the right message to them, and you get the right feedback from them. Because a strategy is not a point of time document. It's a living document that says what you need to do. And it's not a document somebody goes into a closed room and comes up with. It's a document which works when all stakeholders are involved and all of them work together to give feedback and refine it to come up with the best one, which is for your product and your company. With that, I'm going to stop the presentation and open it up for any questions. Malvika, over to you. Malvika, you're on mute.
Sorry. So sorry. Thank you, Roy. This was super helpful and very insightful. And personally, strategy is something that's very, very important when it comes to achieving business goals. So I completely taking a lot of notes from what you said today. I'll just quickly share my screen so that we can start for Q&A. Okay, so I'll give everyone a couple of minutes so that everyone can just formulate their questions, and I can quickly talk about some of the use cases that we as product people. So what are we mostly, what are some of the scenarios that we are mostly effective in? If you want to grow your product team by 1 to 5 people, your PM is going on a parental leave and you need someone to fill in. One of your PMs is leaving, and we all know how much time it takes to hire a PM. If there is a temporary initiative that's urgent and it requires immediate attention, and or if you want to grow your product team or expand more processes. So these are all of the scenarios where we are super effective. We have also worked with a lot of clients like Zolando, WeShare, Scout 24, Tier, One Football, and a lot of other clients that we couldn't fit on the screen. And we have also received a lot of positive feedback from different clients, like how quickly we were able to onboard with them. They had a great experience working with us. We were able to add value quickly, and so much more. So this slide is definitely my favorite. I love this slide. I love how we are quickly growing and we are adding new faces each and every day. We are a diverse team and who come from different nationalities and different backgrounds, who add a lot of value. Our headquarters is located in Berlin, but we are a remote first company, and we encourage remote working. So if you want to see your face up on that slide, we are hiring for multiple roles. We have a lot of openings both for product managers and as a senior business development managers. So feel free to go on productpeople.join.com and apply for any relevant positions. Great. So coming back to Q&A, and I hope you guys have already formulated your questions by now. So let's see. Okay, so to take up the first question, we have one question from LinkedIn. How do you know that the product you are building is the right product to build in the first place? How do you know your customers will buy it? Do you use prototyping or any other sort of market validation at Meta?
So I'd kind of answer it right. One is you can never know whether what you're building is the right product or not till it goes out in the market and people are using it. User research, validating, prototyping are all proxies towards that and give you more confidence is what you're building is correct or not. But ultimately, your best solution and your best critique comes when you're actually live with your customer and you're getting feedback from there. So there are a bunch of different techniques people use, right? But again, you need to understand that all of these are proxies.
Okay, thank you, Roy, for answering that. We have a lot of questions coming in. We have 2 questions in the Zoom chat channel. So if you guys want to unmute yourself or ask yourself, feel free to do that, or if I can also take it up.
I would love to do that. I am AC.
Great. Please go ahead.
So my question would be, how do you tie your strategy to your product vision? Or if it's the other way around, then the other way around. What comes first from your POV, and how do you tie that, right? In the next 5 years, for example, in the example that you were saying.
Cool. I think the way I personally do it is, if you see the strategy, we talked about a bunch of phases, right? The first phase is understanding the state of the union. The second stage is defining the end state. Third is the strategic parts. Where I see product vision coming in is stage 2, right? Where once you understand the state of the union, right, you define the end state. And end state can be defined in a bunch of different ways, right? Formalizing a product vision is also one way of defining an end state. You can also do it based on success statements, Now, once you define the end state and product vision that way, right, your paths will definitely fit in much easier.
Understood where it comes in. Thank you very much.
So we have another question from a LinkedIn user. So how do you create a meaningful product strategy for smaller, fast turnaround products?
I think it's important to understand the difference between strategy and roadmap. Strategy is supposed to give you a long-term direction, right? Roadmap is what you do on a weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis. So it doesn't matter whether it's fast turnaround or not, right? A strategy is definitely a worth exercise doing, whatever the size of the product. Now, what definitely might change is in a fast moving product, one, your market understanding, right? If you're working in a very new market, you may not be able to even project the state of the market 5 years from now, let's say crypto or an NFT market. Given how fast the market is evolving, a 5-year projection is going to be very hard and very difficult to do. So in those cases like that, one, you understand what your fundamental assumptions behind the market are and continuously revalidate them over time. If you suddenly realize a market has changed, a context has changed, you need to pivot. Second is, if you look at good strategies, they won't really prescribe you what project to do. It won't tell you whether, for example, you need to make your button sticky, or whether you need to change the color of the button, or whether you need to remove the button altogether, right? Your strategy just gives you the framework of which way to go, what kind of initiatives to do. Some companies will do 100 projects under an initiative. Some companies will do 2 projects under an initiative. Again, it depends upon your product to product, your company to company. So I don't see that the strategy process is going to be very, very different and will not be relevant for a fast moving product.
Thank you, Roy. We have another question. So Lisa says that I have seen a lot of strategies have more than one pillar. How would we know whether it's getting too broad?
Good question. I think strategies will have multiple pillars, right? Most strategies will have more than one pillar. The question is, are you prioritizing hard enough? And are you prioritizing the most important things you can do? If all your pillars are equally important, something seems wrong in your strategy. Because at a good place, when you finalize the strategy and the initiatives, you should be able to stack rank between pillars, stack rank how much investment you want to do in each of them. So I don't think too many pillars are bad per se. I think where pillars become distracting is one, either you have too many of them, or two, you can't do relative prioritization.
Great. So we have another question from Moon. Moon, do you want to mute yourself? Sorry, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, I would be happy to. First of all, thank you for your time. It was a very interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. I will definitely come back and watch it. It's available on the YouTube. Meanwhile, my question is that I know, like, for leadership, we have like different styles of leadership, like EQ or strong or very charismatic. There are like different types of leadership. Do you think there's like different types of product managers? Like,
for sure, I think the answer to the question is, I don't think you'll find 2 product managers in the industry who are similar. Why? Because product manager, one, is an emerging profession. And if you think of it as spectrums, right? On one spectrum, you'll have the amount of technological knowledge and depth a product manager should have. The second spectrum you'll have is the amount of business context and the industry knowledge they have, right? The third context is span and people management and how much they do, right? And every company, right, every organization will have different product managers, different sitting on different parts of these axes, right? Ultimately, I think it's about you figuring out what works for you. Are you a strong problem solver, or do you enjoy more working and growing people? Do you really love going deep into the technological parts of it? Or are you more interested in business challenges? I think the right way to think about it is think about what kind of drives and excites you, and then find a role. I think one of the advantages I've seen of product management role is because the scopes are typically wide, you can carve out roles that suit to your strengths. So in an organization, you might be able to talk to your manager and pick up more of certain kind of work, less of certain kind of work, try out some new directions. So I'd say that don't try to think of that stereotypes and see what really works for you there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Roy. So we have another question from LinkedIn. How to avoid having a lower or very high metric to focus on strategy? For example, Kodak should have looked at number of photos clicked. Surely they were focusing on other metrics, missing on this metric.
Can you repeat the first part, please, Malvika?
Yeah. How to avoid having a lower or very high metric to focus on strategy?
Okay. So the way I understand it is the question is about how do you know you have a good metric to measure strategy, right? The answer is it's really hard, and which makes the strategic process hard. I think the way to think about it is understand what you're trying to do and the outcomes, right, very, very clearly. The moment you're able to understand the outcomes very, very clearly, what you want to do, and define that very, very well, metrics become easy. And which is, I think, the classic case of Kodak. If the outcome they were about film sales, right, no strategic process, no good metric decision maker would have given them the metric. Versus if the outcome they wanted to be is that we are the primary medium of taking photos, right? Coming up with the right metric, understanding this tectonic shifts in the industry would have been good. Again, it's more about the vision, the experience, and how you set the outcome statements that will kind of help you see whether you're doing it wrong or right.
Great. So moving on to our next question. It's from Vaughn. Vaughn, do you want to unmute yourself and ask this question? Okay, so maybe I'll just go ahead and ask on his behalf. So how do you lead without authority as a product manager? If a stakeholder just does not entertain your request, what do you do in that case? What options do you have as a product manager?
I think this one is not really a product manager specific problem in my sense, right? I think the first thing is to understand what does the stakeholder want and why they don't want to entertain your request. In a professional setting, people will not reject your request because they don't like you, right? Ultimately, it might be it does not tie into their goals, or they are incentivized to do something else, or they don't believe that this idea will work. I think the most important thing to do is to understand what are the points of difference, right? And why do they not want to entertain you? Because if you know that reason, that's when you can solve it as a good product manager. A good product manager is a problem solver. So I think take this as a symptom of the problem that your stakeholder is not entertaining your request. Try to figure out what the root cause is.
Okay, so I think, Roy, we also have a follow-up to what you said. It's not possible to validate if we are building the right thing. In that case, I'm assuming launching an MVP will be a good way to go about it.
Sure. I mean, until you launch something, you will never know whether you build the right thing. And my cynical sense says that even if you launch something, you still don't know whether you build the right thing because your execution can be really off, right? You might have thought you're going to build a supercar. You end up building a 2-seater slow car. So that is definitely the case. And I think that's where product managers need to have a lot of introspection, and be able to accept failures. I think what some of my biggest failures in my career has been when I sort of thought the product isn't working, but still tried to push it along. I think the real test comes is when you launch it, and then you realize how soon to cut your losses.
Thank you for taking that, Roy. We have another question from LinkedIn. So Valentina asks, how do you manage the situation in which the C-level push in one direction while customers push in other side? What weighs the most between business or market customers in developing a strategy and roadmap? How can you handle the decision?
Okay, I think it's a great question, right? Because, but I think one of the things which has stuck me from my experience is Walmart. We used to have a saying called customer is the king. Ultimately, they are going to pay for the product. They're going to pay for your salaries. Now, C-level might want to push for thing A, right? While customers might want to push for thing B. What's important is to get those viewpoints together in one place. Understand why the C-level wants to push for product A, understand why the customers want to push for product B, and then kind of slowly start to unpack that out. Is it that the C-level have a certain belief which is not true from the customers? Or is it that there were information about which the customers were giving, right, which the C-level was not aware of? So the first problem I'd solve here is the information asymmetry. Make sure that one, C-level understands what all you've learned from your customer using user research, voice of customers, right? That's a good way to drive that validity. And then secondly, understand from the C-level of why they want to go the way they want to go, right? Once you know both of them, then it's a simple question of understanding the trade-offs and saying, okay, if you take path A, what is your short-term view? What is your long-term view? If you take path B, what's the short-term view and long-term view? Again, a lot of the strategic questions have no one direction, right? It's just about understanding the trade-offs and having the group agree that you're making the right trade-off given the information you have. So the way I'd approach it is, one, make sure the information asymmetry is gone. Second, make sure these trade-offs come when you're talking about the strategic direction. So as a group, everybody agrees on the trade-offs, and you can build something which aligns to those.
Great. So we have another question from our Zoom channel. A lot of emphasis has been put on setting an outcome-focused roadmap. How can you extract enough information from the strategy to set an outcome-focused roadmap, or how can you align the two?
Cool. I think this goes back to the slide where I showed about the gray area, right? A strategy, where does a strategy end? Where does the planning begin? And essentially, it's about how deep you want to go there. In a strategy, you definitely want to talk about the high-level initiatives, right? Now, as the part of the strategic process, do you also want to flesh this out more? Sometimes you will do that because you have the time and that is important enough. Sometimes you won't do that because it might be for some other team to work upon it. It also might be that, hey, this is important, but there are other things which are more important, right? The best way you can do that is take your strategic initiatives as the source of truth, right? And then start breaking things down. So as I said, going back to my slide, if you can go back to the video, you can see it's what I call the intersection of phase 3 and phase 4.
Cool. I think we have Marv. Marv also wanted to ask his question. He has been trying to raise his hand. So Marv, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure if so depending on the answer, I might have a follow-up. So my first question is essentially in a company, I don't know if it's if it's different in an early stage or a big enterprise, but who essentially sets up the product strategy? Is it the head of product, or is this initiative given to like a team to sit together and hash this out? Does it come down from the C-level and so on?
Yeah. Okay. I don't think I have a single answer to give, right? I've worked in different companies. I've heard from people who work in different companies, it's different everywhere, right? Sometimes it's the CPO who works with a group of people to come up. Sometimes it's individual product teams who are expected to come up with the strategy. So I don't think there is one answer. Now, there are pros and cons of each, right? If you have a really senior level person working on the strategy, they may not have the nuances of everything there buttoned up, but they may have a more holistic view of the marketplace, of the industry, and they might have a very good idea of where we need to go. Versus, on the other hand, if you give it to the teams, right, the teams may not have the broad level view, but they may be able to go into a lot of depth in their product and come up with much more concrete initiatives, which drive the product and the strategy forward. So in that sense, right, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. Each group will carry its own biases. Each group will have its own strengths when it comes to setting strategy.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
We have a similar question from the YouTube channel. So in your experience, how much input or influence do product managers have into the strategy?
As I said, I don't think there's going to be a simple answer here. It depends upon organization. Like, okay, maybe one thing to talk about is there are different levels of strategy, right? The lowest level of strategy is maybe a feature. How do you drive adoption of a feature? A second level of strategy might be that, okay, it's not just a feature, but a group of features or a product. The third level could be, it's now a group of products or a portfolio. The next level could be, it's not just one portfolio, but it's multiple portfolios. The other group could be, it's not just one business with multiple portfolios, but it's multiple businesses. You will have strategies at all of these levels, right? As product managers, how much you influence all of them will depend upon the organization culture, how senior you are in the organization, how it's set up for strategy. But typically, a feature level strategy is where a product manager will have a lot more influence than perhaps thinking about a company level strategy.
Thank you, Roy. We have a couple of more questions. So we have one question from our LinkedIn user. Shivam has a question. What will be the product manager approach when it comes to error handling after releasing a product and the error might happen due to the development team?
Okay, this is not really a strategic question, but let me answer it. I think one, the most important thing to do in a successful product team is there is at the end no development team, no product management team, there is the team. This team is shipping something, right? And you want to ship love. If there is something there which is not working, the team needs to get together and figure out, one, whether it's important to solve or not. Two, who should be solving it? A blame game is not how you run a successful product team.
That's very true, Roy. I think this was the last question. If anyone has, we have 10 more minutes to go. So if anyone wants to ask any more questions, feel free to put it on our channels and we'll take it from there. If you have any follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Hey, Malvika, can I?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Thanks. Yeah, I'll just ask my question. So thanks, Suvagata. Really interesting call. My name is Anshu. I'm a data engineer. I have worked with a lot of product managers all my life. In fact, I have also worked with sister company of booking.com called agoda.com, dev office based back in Thailand. So in my experience, I find that the product managers, product owners with better technical knowledge tend to be better product owner, right? That's my observation, maybe wrong. And that also prompts me to look more into it and maybe eventually seek a career into it. Would like to know, what do you think about it? Is it a critical component, and how big, if so?
So I think the way I phrase it, and perhaps it's a bit cynically, is most digital product managers are building digital products, right? They're not like, for example, painting a poster or doing something artistic, though some of us might have those hobbies, right? So as somebody who's managing digital products, it's important to understand technology enough, right? You need to understand the technology trade-offs, what's happening. So some understanding of technology is good enough. Now, the question is that how much is good? I think it depends upon the person, it depends upon the role, right? If you're working, as I said, in a level which is defining features, right? Understanding of technology is a real boon, because then you'll be able to go and define features very well, understand the trade-offs very well. As you start growing higher and higher, right? uh, If you're managing a portfolio of products, understanding technology is definitely important, right? But will it be a make or break thing in defining a portfolio? Well, maybe not. So as you move up the product management value chain, other things like understanding the trade-offs become more important. Understanding your stakeholders and defining how to manage them, how to understand their expectations become more important. Being able to work in ambiguity and bringing structure to ambiguous problems become more important. Technology skills in a technical company, in a technical product will always be important, but it may not be the thing which determines your success or failure.
Can I have a very short follow up on that? So is it an important factor for the people who are getting into the profession early in their career, and then as you eventually grow, you can phase it out and focus more on business? Is that the right summary of what you just said?
So there are multiple ways people can get into product management, right? And as I said, product managers in industry work across the different roles. In some roles, understanding technology might be a big boon, right? But in certain other roles, bringing industry knowledge, for example, from the insurance industry, as an example, might be a big boon, because that's the area where a product is building on. So yes, digital knowledge will definitely help you in certain roles, but it may not also help you in other roles.
Thanks.
Okay, so Marv, you also raised your hand. So was it for the previous question, or do you have a follow-up question?
No, I just have another question.
Sure, please go ahead.
And also, if I may, I don't know if you guys structure the call like this, but if I may also chime in on the question from Anshu, I think it was Anshu. Like, if it's okay to also comment on that, or should I just ask my question? Okay, cool. So so I just got a thumbs up from Mansoor. So actually, I asked a very similar question to a previous mentor, and he gave me the exact same answer. Where actually, like in their company, having technical background, which actually I don't, and I was looking to do like full stack. Like a full stack coding bootcamp course, and he said actually in the role that I was looking for, it would hurt me. And some companies, it really depends actually on the types of companies that you're going to also be applying for. Some companies don't like it, and some companies actually prefer it. So, for example, if you're applying to let's say Google, like to my knowledge, they actually prefer product managers to have a computer science background. Maybe not in absolutely every single position, but the majority. This is like to my knowledge. You can get more information about this from the book Cracking the PM Interview. A lot of PMs know about this book, but it's called Cracking the PM Interview. You'll find a lot of information on what they look for product managers. And the last thing that I'd like to chime in on, if you have a data background, essentially there are technical product manager roles, and there are product managers that are within the data sphere. So like there's, a product manager of like data science or whatever it is. So just something to explore there. Now, my question to you is, when it comes to product strategy, how dynamic is it? And how often does it get revisited, changed, or whatever?
Okay. So I won't give a single answer. I think if you're revisiting product strategy every quarter, something is wrong, right? But if you did a product strategy this half, you're revisiting it next half because your fundamental assumption of the market changed. That's the right thing to do. So I think the way to think about this is there are some fundamental assumptions you make in a product strategy, right? One is the assumption about the state of the union. The second is the assumption on your execution path to that, right? If any of those fundamental assumptions change, right, you need to revisit your product strategy. Now, if they're changing for you every week or every month, something is wrong. So, which means perhaps you need to sit down, do a better job of looking around corners, having a more thorough understanding of the assumptions, and you build it out.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we are almost running out of time, so we can take just one last question. So we have one question from our LinkedIn channel. So Roberto wants to ask about the strategy that Facebook is talking related with becoming Meta. Is there some guidelines and new principles that are on the basis of this decision? Should I understand that Meta, it's a new concept, or it connects with the evolution of 2D social media?
So I think the best way to learn about it is to go to our channels and learn about what is called about how we are thinking and how we're thinking of the entire metaverse, right? Ultimately, what we believe is it's the next evolution, right? And we as Meta want to play a leading part in driving that evolution of the market, of the user experience. But I'd suggest that you go to our channels, you go to some of the videos, our leaders are speaking about this to learn more.
Great. It's almost 7:30, so our time is up. And thank you so much, Roy, for answering all the questions. We are so grateful to have you here today. Your session was insightful, and I just wanted to thank everyone who joined today and who asked great questions. So yeah, so we do this every Tuesday, so feel free to check out our meetup page. We have product management events, so please check it out and join our next event as well. We are also there on Telegram, so you can chat with us and follow us there, and support us at Patreon. And thank you once again, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And I just have a final quick question, Roy, because everyone was asking this privately, but are you okay with sharing the slides?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So everyone, I'll be sharing the slides through the comments on YouTube and LinkedIn. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, guys. It was great. Thanks.